Find out what the Shadow Transport Minister thinks. Tarry is with us now. Hello to you, Mr. Tarry. How do you feel about defying the leader? Why are you doing it?
I'm not defying anybody. I'm the Shadow Secretary of State for Transport. I'm here supporting 40,000 low-paid transport workers who've decided to go on strike. Look, this is something that's important that people realise. These workers are not massively well paid. They're safety critical workers. They're people that work in ticket offices. These are people often paid £25,000 or less. Labour will always stand on the side of workers who are making very difficult decisions. Last few weeks in my constituency, our food bank ran out of food because people couldn't afford to donate to the food bank. We've got doctors talking about going on strike, nurses, we've got communication workers in the postal service, we've got lecturers. All across the country, industrial disputes are breaking out for the very simple reason this government doesn't care about ordinary working people in Britain. Instead, they've had 10 years of austerity and not even able to come forward with serious offers in terms of at least even matching the level of inflation for people's pay rises across the public and private sectors.
Yeah, earlier this week, he said, do not go onto picket lines, and you did.
If Keir Starmer was in number 10, I wouldn't be standing here today because it wouldn't be an industrial dispute. If I was running the Department for Transport, we would have set the parameters for the 14 train operating companies, for Network Rail, to make sure, and for that matter TfL, to make sure that there was enough money coming forward and enough serious discussions taking place with the TSSA, RMT and on Saturday the ASLEF unions to make sure that we didn't need to be an industrial dispute. This is very simple. You can't turn around to workers that kept Britain running during the pandemic and say, you know what, you're going to have to suck on it. We're going to give you less than the rate of inflation, so therefore you need to accept a below inflation pay cut. That's clearly not acceptable. There's not a single Labour MP thinks that's acceptable, and I believe that Keir Starmer doesn't think that's acceptable. The key thing today is to say, under a Labour government, these industrial disputes would not be happening. It's the government, the Tory government, that's agitating for these things to happen. We've got two Tory leadership contestants in a bidding war to dismantle 200 years of workplace rights that we've built up in this country. That's what you get in Tory Britain. You get inflation out of control, 10 years of austerity, below inflation pay offers, and dismantling our hard-won freedoms and rights. That would never happen under a Labour government. And I tell you what, the sooner we have a general election and the sooner Keir Starmer, and I'll be working every single day to get him into number 10, is in charge of this country, British workers will be far, far better off.
You might not, because you might get sacked.
This isn't about me and what happens to me. This is about the 40,000 people that have decided to lose a day's pay, people who are paid not very much money at all. That's the focus of today. It's about saying there's a red line that needs to be drawn in the sand because the way the government are treating workers across Britain is absolutely disgraceful. You know, they rushed through legislation just a few weeks before the end of Parliament to be able to bring in strike breakers. Look at their disgraceful actions over P&O. Look at the disgraceful way they failed to support workers at British Airways. People in Britain have had enough, Kay, and it's about time people started standing shoulder to shoulder with workers because they are the people that will vote in the next Labour government.
The chairperson for the Labour Party has just been on the telly. She says it's up to the whips to decide what happens to you next. Do you think you might lose your job for insubordination?
My focus today, as it always is making sure that Labour's message of what we are going to do to transform this country,
because I have let
to move forward to number 10.
I've let you do that for a good 5 or 6 minutes now. My question is, are you prepared to get sacked for insubordination?
I've not been insubordinate to anyone. I support Keir Starmer. I think he's by far the best person to be Prime Minister of this country. I believe he will be the Prime Minister of this country. My job today is to support transport workers as a Shadow Transport Minister, to support the travelling public. Look, Kay, we've just had the hottest days on record in British history. The climate crisis is totally out of control, and yet we're here on a dispute when actually our public transport networks should be pumped full of money so that they are able to work and to function. We can get people onto trains, off of planes, out of their cars and onto trains. This isn't just about this dispute here today. This is about the future of our country and the future of our planet. And I tell you what, under a Labour government, this dispute wouldn't be happening. Keir Starmer would be very clear that we would have fair pay offers for every worker with a public or private sector across this country. And I believe that is why we will win the next general election.
OK. How much do you think the rail workers should get paid as a percentage increase?
I think it depends, depending on the grade, depends on the different job. I'm not in those negotiations. But I tell you what is not acceptable, offering people below inflation pay rises. That is clearly not acceptable, because that's saying to people, you need to have a pay cut instead of a pay rise. That's clearly not something that's going to help this dispute get ended anytime soon.
OK, so you're suggesting above inflation pay rises for rail workers, I'm guessing for all workers?
I'm suggesting that every worker deserves a pay rise that is in line with inflation. And at the moment, the RMT and TSA have been offered 4% this year when inflation's running at 11% and then a 2% on the following 2 years. That is a real terms pay cut. No worker should be offered a pay cut as a way forward whilst having a sort of gun put to their head in terms of losing their jobs. Remember, many ticket office staff are facing actually losing their careers entirely because they're being told that ticket offices are not going to be part of the future on the railways. Well, tell that to disabled or blind passengers trying to get onto trains or trying to buy a ticket. It just doesn't work for them. Instead of attacking our public transport network, the government should be supporting it.
OK. So you're suggesting all public sector workers should get at least 11%. What's that going to do to inflation?
I didn't say that, Kate, at all.
Yeah, you did.
I said there
That's exactly what you said. You said they should get at least inflation, and then you said 11%.
Serious negotiations around the table.
That's exactly what you said.
Serious negotiations around the table. There needs to be serious negotiations across every dispute that's going on in this country, because the reality is it is not acceptable for people to be in a situation where even the food banks are running out of food. How do you explain to a worker having to put over £100 into a tank of fuel or paying £1,500 a month just to sort of heat and have electricity in a 2-bedroom house? You know, this is totally out of control. The government needs to get a grip, and instead of waging war on workers, what they need to do is actually support ordinary workers in Britain.
So you did say 11% for public sector workers. That's exactly what you said. Are you going back on that now?
I'm saying very clearly that inflation is out of control, but putting forward pay rises that are serious, that actually, because you have to remember, right, a lot of public sector and private sector workers have not had pay rises for more than a decade. So actually, even if you were to match inflation now, you still wouldn't be catching up with where workers were if they'd had, you know, rises in line with inflation over the last decade. At what point, Kay, do you think it's fair for workers to stand up and say enough is enough? We can't feed our families, we can't pay our bills, we can't put fuel in the car to get to work, they can't even afford to probably buy the train tickets to get to work. That is not acceptable, and people have had enough.